First, let me welcome you to this evening's program. And as you can see, it's redefining quality of life, living fully with illness, disability, and aging. I'm Bernard Bandman, and I am a founder of the Center for Communication in Medicine, along with Celia Engel Bandman, who is sitting over there, and the late Patricia Barr, who was an attorney in Bennington for many years, and a patient. So we're really quite excited, actually, about presenting our first SpeakSooner program in Arlington. Some of you may know that we've been offering these programs locally throughout the state and actually across the nation. Last time we were invited actually to Stanford Medical Center to do a program very similar to the one that we're doing tonight. But like I say, we're really so pleased to be here in our area, in our community. So let me just tell you something about SpeakSooner. What is SpeakSooner? So beginning in 2001, the Center for Communication in Medicine, which is a Bennington, Vermont-based nonprofit, we began to offer educational programs to patients, families, and healthcare professionals, starting in this area. And our aim is to help improve communication between those people. And so you'll hear tonight, probably over and over again, about communication. Because communication, in fact, is the key. Easier said than done. And we all know that. We all want to get better at it. And that really has become our mission over almost now 20 years. So our goal this evening is to help you learn about ways to improve doctor-patient communication, leading to a better quality of life, while facing the challenges of illness, disability, and aging. You're going to hear a lot about the importance of us taking the lead in opening up conversations with our doctors. That's not how we've been programmed, but it's really the way that we have to become more comfortable, more familiar in being able to open up what are often difficult conversations. So, although this program is really aimed at all those illness, disability, and aging, we will primarily focus, because of the panel that we have this evening, on illness. But keep in mind that the same kinds of issues, the same kinds of challenges are there for people who are also facing the limitations of disabilities and aging, the limitations that take place when you're trying to live a life as fully as you possibly can. And what comes with that often are emotional stresses that need to be addressed as well. So, it is really my pleasure and my privilege to introduce you to the panel. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of you know these folks from Arlington, but they are also people who will be able to help us kind of dig a little bit deeper into the challenges that they faced, they've overcome, and help us actually become more effective communicators. So let me start with Colonel James Baker. And you have the program, and I am going to read this primarily because the program is being recorded by GNAT. So those folks are not going to have this program in front of them. Jim Baker, for over 30 years, has served with the Vermont State Police, retiring from his post as director in 2009. Since then, Colonel Baker has served as an interim police chief at Rutland in Manchester, and as interim director of the Vermont Police Academy, and as a director of the Law Enforcement and Support for the International Association of Chiefs of Police in Washington, D.C. He currently leads a volunteer community renewal project here in Arlington. Kim Baker, if you don't know, is to his left, to your right. And Kim is a retired RN, who actually I knew many years ago because she was the nurse for my physician back in the day. And she had a 40-year career serving as a healthcare provider and advocate, strong advocate for her patients. The mother of 3 grown children and 6 great-grandchildren. Grandchildren, sorry, Kim. She continues to care for her community and family while acting as a primary caregiver to her husband, Jim. Reverend Kathleen Clark, to Kim's, your right, has served as pastor of the Federated Church of East Arlington since 2007, where she and her husband, Roger, reside in the parsonage. Her prior work is really actually very impressive. She's worked as director of Bennington County Head Start, executive director of the United Way of Bennington County, and executive director of the Project Against Violent Encounters. She earlier spent a decade working in higher education. And Dr. Michael Welther founded the Arlington Family Practice in 1987 and later became an employee of Battenkill Valley Health Center in 2014. He spent 3 years at Southwestern Vermont Medical Center Powell campus before returning home to Arlington in 2019. Dr. Welther received both his undergraduate education and his medical degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and is board certified as in family medicine. So, let's begin. One of the little hiccups we've had, and we've tried to work this out so that you'll be able to see the video, not just hear this video, was Sarah Merrill was up to the challenge, but she wasn't quite able to get the video right. However, we are going to be able to listen to some patients who were part of a project on difficult conversations that we developed. So let's listen to what these patients have to say.
I envisioned being part of this team and the doctors having calls about possible treatments and what happened with the scans, what should we do next, where I would be able to participate, at least listen in, and that never happened. And I do believe that they talked or emailed about things, and we're generally in agreement. But it wasn't in that loop as much as I would have liked to be.
Inquire from time to time, is this what you want? Is this what we want? Make sure that the decision-making process is still a shared one, that you're not being an island somewhere.
Sometimes, if you don't say anything, they think, well, he understands everything I've told him. And they kind of go along with that premise, but, so if you don't understand something, you need to ask. They don't know what you know, what you don't know, what level you're at, or what level you can understand.
So, the patient should guide their life. Not the doc telling the patient what to do, and that's the only thing you should do. So you got to communicate with them what you want to do, and I think most physicians will cooperate and warn you that it may not be the best road to travel, but you may choose to travel that road.
Okay. It's got a little bit out of order here. Sarah, thank you. Sarah, so what I'm going to ask the panel actually to go to the second set of questions that we have, which is about partnering in your own care, and we will come back to coping with unwelcome news afterwards. So let me start with Jim. We just heard these patients share their views about what they expect of their doctors and how actively involved they prefer to be in decisions about care. We hear one of the patients talk about, he'll do whatever the doctor says. Well, we hear another patient says, quality of life is most important to me. And I'm going to do what I want to do, in spite of the fact that the doctor might disagree. So, Jim, I've heard you talk about the importance of advocating for oneself. So could you tell us a little bit about how you go through making decisions about care with your doctors?
You know, my situation's a little bit different than the folks that were on the audio, in that I'm being treated in New York City at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and I'm being treated with a trial, targeted immune therapy trial. And the way we make our decisions with the doctor is that there's a level of faith that we have in the staff, because we've developed this relationship with them over the last year and a half, 2 years. And we've gotten to know the nurses well. Where I go for my infusion, we know all the nurses there. We know that one of the nurses lost her dog recently. You know, we have that kind of relationship with the staff. And so the best way for me to describe how Kim and I go about interacting with the doctors are, we listen very closely to what they tell us. I've done a lot of research myself on targeted immune therapy, and the research is being done. I had renal cancer and a tumor on my left kidney, my kidney removed, the tumor removed, and it spread to my lungs. And so we've done a certain amount of research, but we don't necessarily take for blind faith what the doctors tell us, but we have enough faith in the staff there that we trust their word. But I guess the best way I would put it, Bernie, is that, trust them but verify. And make sure you understand what they're saying to you and what they're trying to accomplish with you. And so it's not me just going out and telling the doctor, no, I'm not going to do that. I pretty much follow what the doctor tells me to do, but I also verify what they're telling me and clarify with them what I can do and not do. For example, I've had 2 surgeries. I had a second surgery about 6 months ago, and I like to swim and I like to play golf, and they weren't going to let me do that at first. And I had to bug the surgeon about, when can you let me start swimming, because that's important to me when it comes to my quality of life. So the way we deal with that is that it's not really either or. We don't blindly follow them, but we in general follow recommendations from the docs and the nursing staff, but we make sure that we understand why they're asking us to do what they ask us to do.
Thanks, Jim. Well, let's take questions later.
My question is if everybody in the room could hear him, because I'm in the front row and I can hardly hear him.
Are you having problems?
I don't think
The
yes.
alarm is connected to the sound system, the one.
Yeah,
Oh,
'cause
right.
I'm having a hard time
Okay,
hearing.
you know what? What I will do, gladly, is hand the mic over.
Sorry to bother you.
Okay, no, thank you. So let me do this to you, Jim. And the other question, if you could address, is one that comes up frequently, which is about second opinions.
Yeah, so can you hear me better now? Can folks hear me? That's the first time somebody's told me they can't hear me. Just kidding. When I was diagnosed, and I know Dr. Bam is going to get back to this question about what my reaction was when I was diagnosed. We started asking questions of ourselves right away. I never went for a second opinion, but where the urologist was going to send me was to a different hospital. And Kim and I kind of read the situation as the doctor did not have a lot of confidence in that facility. And we did a little bit of research and realized that it probably wasn't the right place for me to go. And as a result of that, we made some other inquiries through folks that we knew, and I ended up in Sloan. But what I often say to people, I have friends that have been diagnosed since I've been diagnosed, and they've reached out for me for whatever my advice is worth. And what I often say to them, and this is kind of a law enforcement term, do not take the first report from the battlefield. I know that in one case, a friend of mine, primary doctor, was giving him a certain amount of time to live, and this is not a reflection on my good friend Dr. Welker, but primary doctors in the world of cancer really have no business starting to tell you, because what we've learned is the research is so robust now around cancer that you need to go see an expert that understands cancer. And not only that, you need to go see an expert that knows your cancer, just not cancer in general, because it's amazing what they know. And I went to New York thinking I wasn't going to live, and that was in December of 2017. So second opinions are important, but my message is more about your primary is going to diagnose you, or in my case it was a urologist, and just do not take what they're telling you for gospel. You need to go and verify that and do some probing. And if it means a second and third opinion, go and get a second and third opinion.
Thanks. Could you pass the mic to Kim, please?
Joe.
Here. Just get this behind you, yeah.
Yeah, just go choke it.
There we go.
It's her chance.
Okay, Kim. Well,
You want to speak?
okay, let me grab, okay,
Yeah.
that's good. So Kim, knowing you from way back as a nurse, you have a lot of medical knowledge. And there's an advantage to that, and there's sometimes as a caregiver, wife, spouse, there can be a disadvantage. It's a double-edged sword. So I'm just curious, when you go with Jim to your appointments, do the doctors talk with you, turn to you as a colleague?
Well, they know that I'm a nurse, so they know that I have some medical expertise. So with that said, Jim and I are partners in this. So I feel when we're there that they're talking to us together, that we make decisions, that they give us reports together. And the double-edged sword comes in really more because I do know a lot, and we have a patient portal that whenever Jim, we live CAT scan to CAT scan, and when he goes down there, we have a battery of tests every time. He has to have labs and EKG, urine, and everything has to be approved before he has his infusion every 3 weeks. And the CAT scans are every 8 weeks, and he gets a battery of bone scans and brain scans and so on every 6 months. So all the reports eventually come on that patient portal. And so initially Jim was getting on and trying to, and he was just chomping at the bit. He still does, but he was trying to interpret what he was reading. And we were running into problems with that because he was reading every single word, trying to figure out what every single thing meant. And the anxiety level was off the charts, which raised my anxiety level. And so we agreed that he would let me look at it and then make the interpretation for him. But we have a new normal now. So our new normal, some of the things that we're seeing on those scans and various other testing are not exactly normal. So in my world, back in the day, when I was looking at these reports, I would be, I would say, oh, this isn't right, this isn't good. So there have been moments where I have had to either send messages or call down there and talk to the nurse about my concerns around some of these tests, because I'm not sure how to take these. I don't know. So for the most part, we've always been reassured, this is okay, it's acceptable, we're going to go with that. And so that makes us both relax a little bit. But it is a double-edged sword because, I want to reassure Jim. I want to be the nurse. I want to be the wife. I want to reassure him. But there are moments when I have anxiety around it. And sometimes I don't tell him that. I just keep it to myself, which can be a lonely place because, I live with the anxiety. This is not easy. This is, there's no guarantees to any of this. We're just going with what we hope will be a good outcome, but, it's a trial. And so this is how we roll, CAT scan to CAT scan. And, Jim, for the most part, we've been very fortunate. He's done really well. He, there have been side effects. He was admitted back when we first started. He got some side effects that made him extremely dehydrated, so he ended up in the hospital for a couple of days. And so we live with the possibility of things happening. We know that every day. So he carries a bag with him. It's our medical bag. So he's on this oral medication. It's part of the trial that he takes every day. And with that, he has to have his blood pressure, has to be within a certain range. So he carries a blood pressure cuff. He carries Imodium. He carries Tylenol. Because he has days when he doesn't feel good. And yeah, he soldiers on every day. It's a very rare day when he'll give in to whatever's happening and just, stay home. It's very rare. He's out every day doing what he does because that's what keeps him going. So we have to discern, are you really getting into trouble here, or do you need to, give into it, or are you going to go out? So every day when he leaves the house, I'm always waiting for a phone call or, something to happen. And so it is kind of a, I worry because I know some of the things that could happen, some of the things that have happened. But yet you've got to, be up every day to support him and, be his cheerleader and tell him you can do this, you can get through it. And that's how we roll. It's what we do every day. So.
Thanks, Kim. Well, as you could see, the best laid plans, but when this just happened, and I'm not tech savvy, so I don't know how to even get back to the PowerPoint, but it just reminds me of dealing with what's unexpected. And really, frankly, what's most important is what these people have to say and the questions that you have and will be asking when we do the Q&A in a little bit. So we're just going to, Kim just said it, we're just going to roll on and get at what really matters, which is hearing what these people on the panel have to say. I'm going to turn it over to Kathy right now. And?
you hold on to your question.
Oh, my question, yes. Well, it has to do with the fact that you probably find parishioners coming to you when they're diagnosed and they're now moved into very uncertain territory, when in particular there may not even be a cure. So I'm really kind of interested in hearing what you say to folks when they come to you and just they're struggling with the challenges of being a patient, and they're also thinking about what's meaningful and how faith can come into that. And it probably is in their lives, but what role it has even more so at those times.
Well, initially, whenever I'm speaking with a person who has just found out that there's something, a serious illness or a disability that's going to be life-changing, or even more often because of the age of our congregation, that they may have to leave their home, that their life is going to be very different. The first thing you asked me, Bernie, was, what do I say? And I would say the first thing I do is listen to them, because for some of these folks, they have no one else to talk to about it, or there's always a concern too. Jim and Kim have a wonderful relationship, but everyone doesn't have that. So sometimes they need someone who's just going to hear everything they say without judgment, without trying to convince them of anything, and really listen to what's the thing that's bothering them the most about this news or this change in life. And the biggest thing often is that people are most concerned about the other people in their life around them. One, they may be concerned about the reaction that others are going to have to this news if they haven't shared it with them. Or they're worried about these other folks. If they may be worried about a spouse or a parent or an adult child or grandchildren. Somebody else is in their life that this is going to affect also. And for many, many people, they're not just thinking about themselves, because they're going through it. They're dealing with, appointments or a new way of living, and so they're experiencing it. But the challenge often is for how those folks that surround them are going to, one, not be hurt by this, and in some rare cases, they definitely will talk about folks around them who are having a hard time with this, and they may be taking it out on them. They may be trying to tell them what to do, which is not what they need at that point, but which is a natural tendency we want to help the people we love. And so we tend to think, ooh, try this, or go talk to this person, or think about doing this, or if it was me, I'd do this. All of which are natural reactions, but usually aren't very helpful, especially when a person's first gotten the news. After a while, when they've lived with it for a time, and especially if they determine that there is no quote-unquote cure, or this is signaling the beginning of the end for them, they have much deeper concerns that they want to have a certain quality of life. And exploring with them, one of my roles is to help them explore what are the most important things to you. What is it that's going to continue to every single day to give your life meaning? What are you passionate about? If it's an end that's coming sooner rather than later, what are the things you need to get done for you to feel peace, for you to recognize that you've done everything you can do? And also, many people are thinking ahead to what's going to happen when I'm gone. And they may have to make decisions about the care of somebody else. There may be a house involved. There may be unfinished other business. And from a faith perspective, it's often figuring out with them too, what do they believe? What's important to them? And do they have a relationship with God? It's often pretty common when someone gets bad news that they tend to blame God or look for a scapegoat of some sort, and God's the handiest one, because God's not going to probably answer back to you or yell at you or give you a hard time. And my attitude about that is God's tough enough to take it, so you go for it. If you want to rail against God, go for it. And I often will tell them, if you want to just pick up the phone sometime and start yelling into the phone that you're mad at God, I'm happy to be the one that listens to that. If you need a person that's going to do that, that comes with the territory. So people's coping mechanisms are all different, and if it's an illness in which they're going to have a new normal, that can sometimes be an adjustment, so allowing them to figure out and explore and maybe test out ideas and theories. I also often am a conduit to other agencies, professionals. I am not a licensed therapist. I can do pastoral counseling for a time, but then I would always refer them, if the need was greater than anything I could do, to a person that, a trained and licensed person who can help with that. But a lot of times it's connecting people to available resources. And it's helped me to have been living here and working in different human service agencies before I entered the ministry, because there are tremendous resources around. But sometimes most people don't keep track of those things until they need them, and then they're looking, and sometimes they're desperately looking. So that's another part of my role.
I'm going to come back around. Thanks. Now that the system went down, I'm actually more comfortable sitting at the table with the panel. I'm going to bring something up now, and it really is good that Jim mentioned this, because how often all of us look to our own family doctor, which is the way I tend to think of it. Primary care is the terminology we hear these days, right? But a real family doctor. And in these times where we don't always understand what's happened and what's happening, we may not understand the diagnosis. We've been to a specialist. It could be cancer, it could be cardiology, it could be neurology, any specialist, and we're kind of baffled about what we're being told. And so how often do we turn to the person that we've known over many years, and we trust, and we ask, what does this mean? How do I handle this? Are there supports available for me to deal with this, because obviously it's so overwhelming? So it's because Jim was just talking about, getting that expert opinion, which is not counter to what I'm really talking about right now. But I'm talking about, and this is, I hope Dr. Welther could really address this, what it's like when his patients come back to you, and they will say, I don't get it, I don't understand it. And I know from past times that you've been on a panel, Dr. Welther, where you're sometimes just out of the loop. You don't even know what's going on. So could you address that whole issue? Sure. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Bernie. So my role as a family physician is at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. At the beginning, it's usually even before there's a diagnosis. Somebody's coming in with some complaint, some pain, and it's up to me to get the ball rolling and try to pin it down, try to figure it out, get those initial x-rays and labs. And a lot of times then we can see something bad's going on, and we have to bring the patient in to discuss it. And I often like to have them come in with somebody, generally a spouse, but it could be another family member. And when I know that there's bad news coming up, I also try prior to that first visit to have as much ready to go for those second and third steps as much as possible, so that there's not a sense that things are being dropped or fall through the cracks. So they come in for that bad news visit, as I like to call it, and I think it's important to be realistic, but also to have some hope. And in most cases, at that point, we don't really know what the whole situation is. We may see a mass somewhere or a lump, or we have some sense that it's probably a cancer, or that it's probably in locations that's causing the symptoms that they came in with, but that we really need more information. And I always tell them that as much as they want this to be done tomorrow, it's more important to get the information properly, even if it takes a little time, because that what determines that next step, and that's usually some type of treatment. So let's say they come in with a mass, and we have that talk and try to be as clear as we can, as I can, about what it is, where it is, and what I think it may be, but also that we don't really know yet, and that we need to go to the next step, which may be a surgeon, to go get a piece of this mass, or it may be an oncologist, or both, and then kind of take it in those steps. Many times after that, they're on their way to a specialist. As Jim has done, he even goes to New York City. A lot of times, I get a lot of the reports, but I don't see people back for a while because they're all very involved with their specialist. And that's fine, that's where the focus should be. So I see my role in that middle section as being just kind of the backstop and to be available for questions. Family members, that's often a huge factor, where you've got all different family members who have or don't have an understanding of what's going on, so we have to manage the family sometimes too. And the patient, again, may have questions about what is the next best step, and they may have 2 or 3 options that they really don't understand, so I can function in that way to kind of lay it out with them, my understanding, or if necessary, get on the phone and talk to the specialist and try to get more understanding about what those next steps are going to be. And then hopefully once that's taken on, they're on the right track and they're going in that order. Somewhere down the road, I'll hopefully be able to see them back, because I think they may still have diabetes, they may have emotional issues, they may have things that are not related to their underlying cancer, and that sometimes the cancer specialists are very good at keeping track of those things, but sometimes they're not. And again, I feel like I need to be that backstop as far as the rest of their health and or their emotional health, which may or may not be taken care of. And then at the end, it comes down to when treatments may be at an end stage, they aren't working very much anymore, or the side effects are just too terrible that the person is contemplating stopping treatment. That may be the other time that I'll get involved, where we start to discuss what's the end of life care going to be like. And one thing I wanted to bring up was hospice and palliative care, because there's a lot of misunderstanding with that. In some ways they're the same, but in some ways they're very different too. Hospice or palliative care is not saying we're stopping everything and we're not going to do anything else. It's really a shift towards comfort care, comfort care, comfort care. Everything is determined at that point based on what is going to make someone comfortable. That may be a very aggressive type of situation, or a very step back and just let nature take its course. And hospice is, in some ways, a way to improve services, because Medicare will cover hospice services, and opens up things that Medicare will pay for, a hospital bed, home health nurses, things that normally may or may not be covered by the insurance company. And palliative care, again, is just saying comfort care is our goal, and we will do anything, whether it's pain medications, whether it's going to the hospital or not going to the hospital, treating infections or not treating infections, but again, all decisions based on comfort. So that's kind of where my roles are, and just kind of be in the background in case questions come up, and a lot of times they do, and a lot of times I just get involved at the end.
I just wanted to follow up one more point, because so much of what we're talking about is our ability to communicate, and communicate openly and clearly. And over the years you've been in practice, what you will find, of course, is some people who are very good at communicating. There are people who are not so good at communicating. There are people who want more information. There are people who want less information. And so we often talk about in our work that doctors are not mind readers, and how responsibility, the role that we find ourselves in nowadays, is one in which it really is incumbent upon us, it benefits us to be more actively engaged in decisions about care. But there are those who may not want to be so actively involved, and yet you have knowledge. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how important this is, about patients really helping you take care of them, and when they're not really addressing some of the concerns, what you do and what you would encourage people here to do.
Well, certainly there's different educational levels, various emotional issues that go along with each person's reaction to something like this. Some of those things I can read just based on experience. Sometimes you can't. It helps oftentimes to have family members who are involved, and many times those family members become a conduit for the individual and can sometimes help interpret it. But it is difficult to kind of find that middle ground at times and try to read whether this person needs more information, needs help in making a decision, because ultimately it is their decision. We shouldn't be the ones telling them what to do. We should be giving them information, obviously as accurate as we can, and trying to help them think about what is the option based on the pros and cons. I wish it were that easy, but it's not usually that easy. And especially when you have 3 or 4 doctors giving 3 or 4 different opinions, and none of them are clear-cut and none of them are easy, it can be definitely difficult. I think family members can definitely be something that I've found very helpful, sometimes exasperating too, but oftentimes helpful, and just trying to help through that situation as much as possible. That's about what I can think.
So as we've kind of meandered in terms of the subjects that we had prepared, we are still, I think, doing a very good job of covering what we really would like to have covered today, and we'll continue this. So one of the subjects that we were going to talk about is really coping with unwelcome news, and I think the panel has really talked about that. And the focus of this program is about redefining quality of life. So having faced emotions, feeling overwhelmed by a serious diagnosis, leaning on people who matter to you, your family, friends, clergy, we're still left with what does quality of life mean when you're ill, or you're disabled, or you're getting older? And who defines quality of life? You probably had experiences where people who really love, they care about you, have thought that they know better about what should be your quality of life. All well-meaning, it's all good. But ultimately, it's really up to the patient to decide. It's up to the family to be able to lovingly be able to share their concerns. But the question is still there. Because you're facing the challenges of serious illness, as we're hearing from Jim and Kim and Reverend Clark and even Dr. Welter, there's still a lot of room to figure out what really matters and have the support and guidance to move in that direction. whether it's from family, whether it's from the doctor, whether it's from your minister, to be able to clarify and then be encouraged. So one of the areas that we wanted to talk about tonight, one of the subjects, was what do you hope for? And what I'd like to do is actually, I'm going to start this time with Kim and ask you, what do you hope for Jim?
Well, of course, the first thing I want to say is a cure, but given what we have in front of us right at the moment, my best hope is that he can continue living the life that he has always lived, being, his ability to function every day and contribute what he does for work, and contribute his passion, being able to spend time with his family. Every day, like I had mentioned before, we try to keep life as normal as possible. That is all we can ask for right now. That's what we hope for. At the beginning, when we first got the news, and after Jim's surgery, I kind of took the role over as the nurse. I mean, I was like a pit bull. I was like watching him every minute and checking his blood pressure and making sure he had his medication at the right time. And over time, it's become a new normal now. So we've kind of relaxed a little bit with that. I had kind of steered Jim toward, taking care of himself a little bit more in terms of, making sure he, checks his own blood pressure, making sure he takes his own medication and records it. He does have side effects, so he carries the bag and he will take the appropriate medication when he feels he needs to. And there are occasions in the middle of the day, he'll just show up at the house and he'll just say, I need to close my eyes for a few minutes, I need to take a nap. And so we've kind of adapted to that. But that is my hope, that this quality of life that we have together will continue. We have a new normal because, things that we could plan before, we always have to bring into account our trips to New York. And that's a 2-day trip. We go down the day before, stay overnight, and then come back the next afternoon. And it's a grind, it is. But we've made it as good as we can. We look at it as a date almost. Because our time, we spend together, we're spending far more time than we ever did before he got sick, because he was away from home a lot. So as bad as all of this sounds, we spend quite a bit of time together. We try to plan vacations around everything. It's not quite the same because, before it was a little more spontaneous. We could plan way ahead. We still have to plan ahead, obviously, with our trips to New York. But we do find little moments when we can get away. And I'm probably out of line by saying some of this because one of the things I had prepared to say was, in dealing with this, as Kathy mentioned, our faith became very important. And family and friends was number one. Number one was family and friends, faith, and that's how we've gotten through this. We have an enormous amount of support from everybody. I mean, we still have meals that will show up every now and then at our house, just out of the blue. I know who it is. It comes, and we always appreciate it. But it's those little things that kind of get us through these moments. And so really for us, our quality of life right now if we can sustain it, is not bad. We really, considering everything that we're dealing with the anxiety, the stress, we've made the best of it. We've recreated our life around everything else because we do have a good relationship. And, you know, there is still the angst. I won't say there isn't, but really we try to fit in a little joy in our life and just make it as good as we can. So.
Kim, you just touched upon how important family and friends and faith is in how you cope with these kinds of challenges, and how it enhances, it clarifies what really does matter. So I'm going to come back to you, Kathy, Reverend, and just in your experience, you know, people come to you, and you touched upon it a little bit before in your comments, but talk a little bit more about faith in dealing with what your parishioners hope for, and how that kind of intersects with the kind of conversations that you have with them. Yeah, could you do that?
Sure. Thanks. Well, more than likely, if they're one of my parishioners and they're actually coming to see me, they're probably fairly engaged in the life of our church. And so they already have a group of people surrounding them with love and trying to lift them up, which is important. We hope that everybody feels that God's love is being shown through the love they've received from other people. Now, certainly everyone's on a different place in their faith life. Some folks are not in the greatest relationship with God, perhaps. Others have a really deep faith. What I hear many, many times from people in our church is that they don't know what people who don't have a faith life do at a time like a difficult time in their life. And I know there are plenty of folks who faith is not a big factor in their life, but for those of us who lean into our faith when the going gets tough, and hopefully lots of other times too, it is a source of strength and hope. And depending on your belief system, what tradition you're from, there are obviously thoughts and theology about what comes next, what this life is meant to be, how you can live your best life, and all of those certainly enter into any times when people are struggling. And for some folks, certainly, I mean, I can think of particular people who I know who, when they experienced a deep loss or a serious diagnosis, they turned away. They felt abandoned by God, so they made the turn complete and they moved away. And sometimes they spend a lot of time trying to figure out how they can come back. Other times, for that point in their life, they've written it off. They've just said, and in that way, I still have to be a support person to them, even if they're not feeling any faith life light within themselves. And sometimes people end up searching in other traditions too when they're going through a hard time. If the one that they've grown accustomed to doesn't feel right, but they don't want to give up altogether, sometimes that's a time when people move to another expression of faith in another way, and that's all good. And sometimes I work with people who say, this isn't working for me, this kind of tradition isn't the support I need at this really hard time, and we'll explore, well, what would be what would help you? What kind of support are you looking for? What kind of faith community would make you feel a part of things? But the one thing I would say in supporting faith communities, since I'm a part of one, is that they can be a tremendous source of comfort and hope and strength for you at the tough times, whatever tradition you come from.
Thanks.
So the only other thing I want to say about that is we have two wonderful priests from our parish who we've become very close to. And they really are like family. So the importance of faith and just having somebody to be able to talk to has really made a difference for us. And Jim is a reader at church, so, you know, we're there every Sunday, and he's been able to continue doing that. And it's just made a big difference for us. And I have St. Jude on speed dial, by the way. I tell everybody that.
Thanks, Kim. I want to just now turn to Jim, who's living the experience, not that Kim isn't, and just knowing you and how vital you are, how active you are, the things you're involved in, and yet you know, and probably many people in this community know, that you deal with side effects of treatment. You get tired. So with the topic this evening of, you know, how do you face these challenges in quality, in really having a full quality of life, as full as you possibly can, could you just talk about how do you do that?
Kim. First of all, just to talk about the quality of life a little bit. You know, one of the things Kim referenced is when we went to New York the first time in December of 17, and the tumor was still in me, and I had both of my kidneys. You know, the doctor was very clear to us. More than likely, we'll never hear him say remission. To hear that is like, well, wait a minute, cancer patients are supposed to go into remission. And so that started defining for me in my mind what was going to happen moving forward. And we were very fortunate. I know some folks get diagnosed, they have to wait for treatment. I was diagnosed on the 6th of December. I saw the oncologist in New York on the 14th of December, and I was operated on the 21st of December. And so it went very quickly for me. In fact, I didn't have much time to think about it, right? Because we had to come back from New York, button up business, and go back. But I tell you that because it starts, if you let it get in your head, it will start messing with your head. And one of the things, to answer your question, doctor, is I don't define myself as a cancer patient. There's people in the room here that I'm around often, and I don't think they hear me talk about, unless they ask me, and they will ask me, how's it going, how's treatment going, and so on. I don't define myself as a cancer patient. I define myself as Jim Baker and who I was in my career and what I'm doing now. And so, but it does take a toll on you because there's certain things you can't do anymore. Now, Kim will remind me, it could be because I'm 63, going on 64, and I can't do, like I was washing my car today, and I came in, she said, you look like you're all in. I go, I am, I gotta sit down for a little while. I go, I used to be able to wash 3 cars, mow the lawn, weed whack, and still get ready to go out to dinner at night. And you just have to put it in perspective that, you know, you're not a cancer patient, you're a survivor. And you have to wrap your head around that there is a new norm, and the new norm is I have to go to New York every 3 weeks, and I have to go through the routine. Ironically, before this, I hated needles, but you know, when I get 12 tubes of blood taken out of me every 3rd week, and you know, Laura, you know, the gal that draws the blood, we chit chat, and it's a new norm. And so, for the quality of life piece, I just don't define myself as having any limitations, even though I do. And so that's how I do it. You know, and I think, did I answer your question?
Yes. I have to right back to you, because what you're talking about is really focusing on what you can do. not what you can't do, and not defining yourself by the limitations. But you're also, and you said it just now, you're able to recognize, and I think that's really important, to recognize, yes, I have limitations, but it doesn't define me, because there's still plenty that I can do in living a full life. Good. Same thing?
No, I just want to echo that, Bernie's point about, and there are things that you didn't do before that you can do, and it all balances out. And I'd be sitting up here not being really candid with you if Kim doesn't say to me once in a while, suck it up, when I start feeling sorry for myself. Because there are days I feel sorry for myself. Why me? But it's not meant in a mean way. And I do have to clarify one thing. She says she's backed off a little bit on the medicine. But she'll text me 3 times. Have you taken your medicine yet? But that's part of the teamwork of fighting your way through this.
Very loving, Kim.
Overlap.
Okay. So we want to set aside some time now for your questions of the panel. And if you can just raise your hand, I'll recognize you. And also, I'm going to repeat the question because we're being taped. And so we can have that on tape, so those who are not able to be here tonight will be able to actually hear the question and then hear the responses from the panel. So do we have any questions, any comments, anything that, yes? But let me first repeat the question. And that is, you're really addressing family meetings, and at times there may be some differences, there may be some conflicts. Again, what we talked about earlier, the different views are really what's best for this person, or not wanting to talk about it at all and just pretend that what's going on isn't going on, and the doctor.
Children in far off places, it may be friends who are neighbors, but I think support system is a crucial factor to help somebody through it, particularly during those rough times. If a family meeting is something that the individual wants to have, or the family really is pushing for it and the individual is okay with it, I always like to do it, everybody together in the same room, hearing the same things, asking all their questions, so that they at least hear the same things, and everybody kind of has the same idea, because people hear what they want to hear what they think based on their own background may not be accurate. And it's tricky sometimes to get something like that arranged, but we try to make an effort to do it. And sometimes we have to do it a few times, particularly as there are some significant changes in patient's situation, particularly as we get closer to the end. And those family members, again, may be very important as far as keeping that patient home, or conversely, deciding that that patient really can't stay home and has to go someplace else. So it can be a real dicey situation sometimes.
Other questions? Yes.
Mine is actually a comment instead of a question, but I was feeling really lonely and unsupported because my family is really far away and doesn't get involved, and I sometimes feel disconnected with people. And through my doctor's office, there was somebody from the state of Vermont that I was connected with, who works for the state, and she comes to my house every week and helps me with my health goals. And I don't know if I should mention her name or not, but it was through Dr. Welter's office that this person really supports me a lot. So I think when there are people out there that are really lonely and don't have family and friends, it's important to connect them to those resources, because I'm really grateful for that. And Dr. Sampson's office had a woman who works there who, like, when I was having a lot of anxiety and not handling the news really well, like, that person called me on the phone and talked to me, and now she meets with me when I have more questions. So there are a lot of resources out there for people that don't have that.
I think what's important about your comment comes back to a comfort or a willingness to really talk about these issues with your doctors or the nurses. So that was one of the things, again, is that there's a tendency, not for everybody, to just wait for the questions to be asked. And sometimes they are asked. But sometimes they're not asked. And one of the messages that we're talking about today, and you're hearing it from the panel, is that we need to take the lead and let those who can help us, whether it's medical, whether it's from the faith community, so that whatever supports can be helpful can be accessed. And again, we're not talking about hoping that the doctor or the nurse reads our mind. We, in this very hurried, pressured, especially in the medical world these days, and we all know this, that if we don't bring it up, then it may not come up, and how critical it could be, especially when you're dealing with, it could be chronic illness, it could be a serious illness. So your point is well taken.
Can I just...
I appreciate, because it's easy when you get diagnosed to go into a shell. And if you don't mind, Bernie, I'll tell this quick story. You find help sometimes where you don't even know help is. And Kim and I often tell this story. We went to New York on the 13th of December, scheduled to see the doctor on the 14th. And we had traveled late in the afternoon on the train, got to the hotel, we hadn't eaten, it was going on like 8:30, 9 o'clock. We found this restaurant that they recommended we go to, it was packed. There was one seat at the bar, and not that we're bar flies, don't get me wrong. But I had to take a phone call from my granddaughter who's sitting up there in the back. And I left to go outside, and Kim sat down, and she struck up this conversation with a guy next to her. And I'm telling you this because of faith. And there are angels out there. And if people don't believe it, just listen to what I'm about ready to say to you. Kim strikes up a conversation with this really nice young guy. And come to find out, Kim says, "What are you doing in New York?" "I'm here from California." He ran a nonprofit that supported cancer patients. And just about once a month, we hear from him. And my treatment is thank God I have good health insurance. I'm blessed to have good health insurance. But it still costs us a lot of money out of pocket every year to go to New York. And his group sends us a check on a regular basis. And that was a HAP meeting. And I can tell you 50 other stories of angels that have walked into our lives that are still supporting us either by a text or a phone call. So what I say to you is pay attention, because there's angels out there that may touch you. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Thanks.
There are a lot of help and services out there, but as Bernie said, we can't always read somebody's mind. Our office has a case manager, the Cancer Center has a case manager. These people are, as it says, managing an individual's case and trying to make sure that things don't fall through the cracks. And if there are financial needs, if there are nursing needs, arranging home health nurses or other agencies out there, those things are there, but we need help to understand where someone's at, and we try to reach out, but again, sometimes things can fall through the cracks. So they are out there, and we just need that communication. It's really a two-way street in terms of trying to find what works for each individual.
Other questions? So what kind of supports, this is a question for Kim, that are helpful?
So some of the things that I have found helpful is just, I get emails, phone calls, texts from various family members, from close friends that know what we're going through. And on occasion, I'll have somebody call me up out of the blue and say, you want to go to lunch? Sometimes that is one of my, since I've retired, and it's gotten more difficult for me to venture out since Jim has gotten sick, because first of all, I tend to isolate myself because I just don't want to deal with having to meet up with people all the time. I'm just like in my own little world. So I have friends that recognize that, and they'll call and say, let's go to lunch or let's go out to dinner. And I'm recognizing that in myself, that I need to do more of that, because I need to, and I think part of it was I felt like I couldn't leave him. I felt like I needed to be near him every minute in case he had a problem. And there is that element still to some degree. I feel like I'm just waiting for the next shoe to drop for him to call me and say I'm really, really sick or whatever. And so I have come to the realization that I need a life, that I need to be strong, that I need to take care of myself. I do see Bernie every now and then, because I need a little moral support and a little, I just need somebody to talk to. So, for me, that helps. It gets me out of the house. Even if there's nothing that can be done, just talking about it sometimes helps. And I've just, some of the things that I say, I'm not the best at doing, because what I have come to realize is that I've stopped exercising. I've just kind of walled myself off. I just don't feel I have the time. I don't have the energy. I don't have the money. It's just all this a lot of excuses. So little by little, I am recognizing that I now need to get myself back into life again and get back to exercising and being around my friends. I think part of it is, as I mentioned before, I've got Jim kind of on his own, doing his own thing. He's more independent of me. I'm not having to manage every single aspect of his life. So it's, there are a lot of things friends can do, and I think even just sending letters, text, phone calls. And like I said, I get every now and then we get a little surprise dinner. Nobody has to do that, but those are the little niceties that make a difference in your life, because people are thinking about you.
Thanks. Sometimes I think we don't know the right thing to say or the right thing to do, and we don't do anything. And so just the putting oneself out, just asking the question like you just did, is a gift. Even though there may not be anything specific that person, whether it's the patient, the caregiver, their family, can really do with that. So there is that, and it's just a feeling that people care. And so that's really important. Just the question itself, is there anything I can do, is important. Any other questions we have? So let me just, kind of try to be concise about your question. You'd like to know more about hospice care?
Well, what their experiences may have been, it's new to us.
Yes.
Never had experience with hospice care in the past. Never had
Yeah.
need to. So.
Well, this may be more of a question, again, at this point, for Dr. Welther. Thanks.
Yes, I have a lot of experience with hospice. And as I said, there's hospice and there's palliative care. So in most cases, when we say hospice, we're talking about what kind of services can we offer someone that will be covered by Medicare, because Medicare will cover hospice services. So to get hospice services, one has to be diagnosed with less than 6 months to live. That's a very soft finding. I have people on hospice for 2 years. But it's kind of that first step. And what that does is that it then opens up Medicare services for nursing care that may not have been covered. It may have been a hospital bed. It may be other things that will allow that person to stay home as much as possible. And then as part of that, but somewhat separately, is palliative care, which is really then determining medications and things that would help reduce discomfort, pain, and just make someone comfortable. In my experience, I think in most cases, hospice care is put off way too late. Because there's a negative connotation to the word. People say hospice, that means I'm going to die and nobody's going to do anything else for me. A person in this community that we all know and love, John Werner, put off hospice care because he was a fighter. We all know that. He fought to the end, and that was probably kept him alive a lot longer than other people. But on the other hand, he could have gotten some services that might have made him more comfortable. And I think we put that off a little bit too long. And again, that 6-month rule is very soft. So I think it's something that can and should be done sooner. Again, somebody on hospice cannot be getting chemotherapy and cannot be getting some of those services that indicates that they're still in active treatment. But at some point, that usually it becomes fairly obvious that the chemo is either not effective or is just way too uncomfortable. So I think it needs to be done sooner. And in the old days, we used to have hospice volunteers. I'm not even sure they're around anymore. There's some. And they would just go in, basically sit with somebody, and allow the caretakers to take off some time. And I think that's still a good thing to do. But it's really more hands-on care that you're trying to give towards the end, or at least to try to make people more comfortable. Just to go back for a second on one thing Kim says, I think another thing that's sometimes left off is caretakers' health. We sometimes ignore the fact that if the caretakers are getting into physical or emotional health issues, that has a very negative effect on the person who's got the illness. So I think it's really important for caretakers to take time out, to have time off, to do things that they need and want and like to do, because if their health physically or emotionally goes downhill, it hurts the other person too.
Yeah. So we're running kind of close to our scheduled time for the program, but I wanted to ask the panel to offer all of you just one piece of advice. What would you say?
No matter if you're the patient or the caretaker, be kind to yourself. Just be kind to yourself, because it is a new norm, and this has been a conversation between Kim and I for several months about her being kind to herself. She's been very kind to me, but you can't work your way through this unless you're taking good care of yourself. And I just don't mean going to the doctors. I mean psychologically taking good care of yourself and making sure that you're not too hard on yourself.
Yeah, thanks.
And I guess getting to the core of what we're talking about is line of communication. That's always, always important between the patient, the family, the caregivers, and anybody else, family members, anybody that is in your life. Just, talk. Just keep everybody informed and, support each other, and that's all you can do.
Good. Could you pass it to
Yep.
Kathy? Thanks.
My advice would be to recognize that you're not doing this alone, that there are people that care. You could be related to them, they could be neighbors, they could be friends, they could be colleagues, they could be medical professionals, that there is a host of people you can tap into. And so illness can be very isolating, and I'd encourage you to lean into the people around you.
There are no stupid questions. Ask. If you don't understand where it is, what it's supposed to do, ask the question.
Thank you. Thank you. Just some final thoughts, because they've already said it. But what comes to mind, Kim just touched on it, is the key is communication. The ability, the willingness to talk with your family, to talk with good friends about what your concerns may be, to be able to ask questions of your doctors and nurses, even though you may feel, as Dr. Wells just said, feel stupid. There are no stupid questions. It's all so important. And interestingly, when people ask questions of their doctors, there's actually been studies, you know how people study things? Doctors spend more time with you. Okay? So just ask a question, something you don't know. Because most of us go to our doctor's appointments and don't know what questions to ask. We don't. And one of the things that we at the Center for Communication in Medicine have done is created a tool, which is really a guide. And the purpose of this, and it's called Difficult Conversations, the purpose of this is really to help people stop and think about what their questions are, what their concerns are, and to identify those. And what this is really a guide to prepare to go in to talk with your doctors. It's also very useful with patients and family members who use it to talk with one another. So what we're talking about this evening, you know, you're getting it firsthand. There's something that you can take away with you tonight, and that is a copy of this Difficult Conversations Toolkit. So I'll talk about that in a moment, but I just wanted to, you know, kind of add on to what they were already saying about tips, that sometimes we just don't know, but there are resources out there, and we're really so pleased that we've been able to develop one of those resources that you'll be getting this evening. So, what does it take? In many ways, it takes building a team. I was talking with Vicki just earlier, and working at the cancer center that I have for the past 30 years as a psychologist by training, besides doing this work here in communication, there was a doctor, an oncologist, his name was Jim Wallace, Dr. Wallace. And Dr. Wallace was the first oncologist in the state of Vermont. And after he retired, he came down here. He practiced in Rutland for many years. And, you know, there's a man with wisdom, years of wisdom. And we'd say, you know, what's the secret? How do you get through this, what we're talking about tonight? How do you live fully? How do you address all the challenges? And he said, build a team. And that's really what everyone on this panel is talking about. Understanding what those resources are takes asking questions. But that's really the key to getting through a lot of these challenges, whether you're the patient or you're the family member. Okay. So programs like this just don't happen. We're so taken and appreciative of the invitation to offer a program to the Arlington community like we've done tonight. And as you are witnessing, the people who are really conveying, offering the gifts are these members of the panel, Jim and Kim Baker, Reverend Clark, and Dr. Welther. they're giving us so much that we can take away, and learning about how do we deal with the challenges. How do we really, in many ways, have a fuller quality of life, even though we're dealing with some serious problems, because it's being done. You've heard it tonight. So very thankful and appreciative also of Principal Sarah Merrill of Arlington Memorial High School and her staff, and a student volunteer who's out there, Colby. Thank you. Great. And we couldn't have done this without the help of Vicki Corey, which we met Vicki, it was Vicki Corey Dinoska. And she's just an amazing person and so instrumental in bringing this program to Arlington. So I want to thank you, Vicki. And GNAT, thank you for taping the show, and that it will afford many people to see this really amazing panel throughout the region. We have some sponsors tonight who, by the way, because of them, you will be receiving a free copy of the Difficult Conversations Toolkit. And that the sponsors this evening are Complete Bookkeeping Services, the Fitzgerald Family Foundation, the Keelan Family Foundation, and Mac Molding. So just so we wrap this up, there are a couple of things. One, we have some fabulous desserts over here, and we can thank Vicki, and we can thank the Battenkill Valley Healthcare staff for baking. So truly community. It's what I really most enjoy about doing these programs, because it has that feeling, because everyone is pitching in. And when you leave, you're going to find the toolkits. Colby has them out there. Colby's going to ask you, and I'm going to ask you, just to leave your contact information, because one of the things that we're very committed to is not only offering these kinds of larger programs, but offering smaller programs, one of which is really helping people learn how to use the Difficult Conversations Toolkit. That's what we do. Big program and in smaller groups. So in order to find out about when those are being offered, just put your name, contact information, and you will be receiving, whether it's by mail or it's by email, we'll let you know about all these programs. And most of all, and also one last pitch. What is also helpful, as we have sponsors for tonight, that there are donor envelopes actually in each of those toolkits. And if you feel so disposed and appreciate what we're offering, please feel free to help support future programs. We appreciate that. And you know what? Let's continue these conversations. So thank you for coming. Enjoy your desserts. Get your free toolkit. Really, thank again to the panel.